Forgot to turn on a recording. So we're talking about, pick up here, why niceness weakens our witness. We are wooed by superficial niceness, satiated. Or saturated. I would think it's saturated, but it looks satiated by it. We will forgive all manner of ills in a person we deem to be nice. We use niceness to grease the wheels of our social interactions. We employ it like a ladder, helping us to scale the heights of our career. And for many Christians, following Jesus means we're just really nice. The friend who says a hard thing we need to hear, the pastor who holds us accountable, the leader who disrupts the status quo, these not nice behaviors are frequently met with swift rejection and even rage. Friendships end. Church members leave. Social media burns with outrage. These kinds of reaction tells us something about the role of our niceness in culture. It isn't just a social expectation, it's a sacred cow. When we turn to it for promotions in our workplace, preference in our community, the power in our ministry, niceness is no longer a harmless social default, but an alternative God whose promises compete with our Christ. In some, it stands between us and obedience. So how did we get here? What does this niceness mean for our Christian witness? Going back to ancient times, virtue is traditionally referred to a particular moral good. In Plato's Republic, the philosopher names 4 classical virtues: wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice. Well, where do you get all these without God? These virtues are not merely about doing the right thing, they're about doing it for the right reason. Plato describes virtue as the desire of things honorable, which means we're motivated by a greater good outside of ourselves. Niceness, on the other hand, aims small. In her book, American Niceness, author Carrie Tyrido Brahman describes niceness as a virtue rather of surfaces rather than depths, while Philip Ryken, president of Wheaton College, calls it a trivial virtue that's easy to fake. You ever seen those people, they just got the niceness smile glued on their face? Niceness is concerned with appearance of goodness and not the reality of it. It gives the facade of serving others, but exists primarily to serve ourselves. In the end, niceness only makes us into whitewashed tombs. I read that verse for you yesterday. We talked about the posers that John Eldridge talks about in Wild at Heart. Let me look up that text for you and share that with you. Matthew 23, 27. We're going to talk about this a little bit today in Sabbath school. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful on the outward, but are full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanliness. Let me see where we're at here. Pristine on the outside, but empty within. In addition to be a false virtue, niceness radically diminishes our Christian witness. Author Randy Alcorn describes it this way: we've been schooled that it's inappropriate to say anything negative. Being a good witness once meant faithfully representing Christ. It even meant being unpopular. Now it means making people like us. We've redefined Christianity to mean, or Christ-like to mean nice. Now, as I read this, there may be some out there that disagree with this, and I want to give you the opportunity. Please, I encourage you, I beg you, I plead with you. No, I do just encourage you. If you disagree with this, give me a call, and that's at the Service Legends Talk text line, 515-442-5764. We've been schooled that it's inappropriate to say anything negative. We've redefined Christ-like to mean nice. Not surprisingly, this false idol has shaped the reputation of Christians throughout the world, Alcorn goes on to say. Non-believers not only knows only two types of Christians, those who speak truth without grace and those who are very nice but never share the truth. In other words, niceness is one of the reasons our gospel message is uncompelling and our witness limp. Niceness is a false form of spiritual formation that has crept into the church, seduced Jesus' followers, and taken much of the power out of our lives. It's one of our generation's favorite idols, and it's high past time to name it. I somewhat agree. Only I would define niceness as political correctness. Worrying about more offending man than offending God. You know, God says if you don't open your mouth, he's going to cause his rocks to cry out. Are we too nice? Is there anything such as being too nice? Just few more thoughts here. After observing the fruit of this false idol in my own life, here's what I concluded. I cannot follow Jesus and be nice. Now this is a girl writing this. Generally, girls tend to be a little nicer sometimes than boys. Artificially nice. Behind the facade, or in front of the facade, or behind the facade nice, however you would phrase that. You know, that artificial smile that's glued on some people's faces. Because following Jesus means following someone who spoke hard and confusing truths. He was honest with his disciples even when it hurt. He condemned the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and turned over tables in the temple. Jesus was a man who went face to face with the devil himself and died on a cross rather than succumb to the status quo. He always treated people who sought him diligently and sincerely kind. I think there's a difference between kindness and niceness. But as she aptly and rightly points out, Christ pointed out hypocrisy, and the Pharisees thought that was like probably hitting them in the head with a rock. They didn't think Christ was being so nice. So I guess it's the angle. You know, as they say, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Well, maybe niceness is in the eyes of the beholder also. We exist in a world that swings between two things, sweetness and outrage. Two behaviors that seem to be odds with one another. In reality, they're two sides of the same coin, a lack of spiritual formation. When our civility isn't rooted in something sturdy and deep, when our good behavior isn't springing from the core of who we are, but instead merely a mask we put on, it's only a matter of time before the facade crumbles away and our true state is revealed. An entire generation of people who are really good at looking good. You know those people? We would call them hypocrites. John Eldridge at Wild at Heart would call them posers. There's nothing below the facade. You know, a poser. Steve Martin, the ex-stand-up comedian, now movie star. I don't think he has so much going on for himself of late, but Steve Martin in his comedy routines, and I'll have to paint a little theater of the mind here for your radio listeners, but you ever catch those poses in the catalogs where someone is let a camera get a shot of a still image, and they're walking with their arms moving, or they have this fake smile plastered on their face. Hey, who? I'm cool. Me. Oh, no, you. Hey. Steve Martin talked about that idea, and that's what would be the classical poser. They're only posing for the camera. They're putting on the artificial smile, the artificial look, the artificial thing, but what's below the facade? There's an entire generation of people who are good at looking good. The solution, however, is not to trade in our appearance for niceness for an appearance of boldness. We have to go deeper in Christ. Jesus was a loving man. He was a gracious man. He was a forgiving man. He was a kind man. But he was also, many times, not a nice man. He was a man who would leave the 99 sheep to rescue the one. But he was also totally unafraid of offending people. Jesus understood the difference between graciousness and personal compromise, between speaking truth and needlessly alienating people, rather than wear a shiny veneer. He became the embodiment of a rugged cross. This is not niceness. It's what we're called to do. Ellen White points it out like this: we need men of zeal, men of courage, whose characters cannot be terrified, flattered, or bribed. Does that sound like someone that is never abrasive? Someone who's never controversial? Mrs. White also says to walk in no man's shadow, stand in your God-given characters and traits, and fully expect God to work in, by, and through you. You know, Paul was fiercely independent. He was courageous. He was full of zeal. He used withering sarcasm and was a severe critic. Paul could stand and rip your arguments to shreds before your very eyes. He could speak lofty rhetoric to the most learned and schooled of listeners, but at the same time speak to the lowliest of mankind. And everyone would understand. That's a gift. That's a gift that not everyone has. But God took that champion of the enemy. He took that champion of Satan. He took that general. He took that warrior of Satan. And he turned him into a champion of God. Now he took any polishing stone and maybe he smoothed off some of the rough edges with the polishing wheel, but he left his character intact. Paul was still a withering critic. Read much of his writings. Paul uses withering sarcasm. Some people would say sarcasm is abrasive. Sarcasm is not being nice. You know, as W.C. Fields, one of my boyhood idols and heroes who died many years before I was even born. I believe he died in 1946 and I was born in 1957. I used to love as a child to watch W.C. Fields movies because I guess that's where I get some of my sarcasm. But W.C. Fields had that perfect attitude. And in many of his movies, he had a little character in the movie named Baby Leroy. Baby Leroy was always doing something to upset W.C. Fields. Like trying to drop grapes in his mouth as he was snoring, or maybe an ice pick in his head as he was swinging on a swing set that just jabbed into the arm of the swing. But W.C. Fields was in a movie, I believe, called Poppy. I think it was Poppy. And he was with an elderly woman who I think baby Leroy was her grandson. And she was trying to, I don't want to say seduce, but she, I think, was trying to lure W.C. Fields into her web of love. W.C. Fields, I don't think, was wanting to go there. But as they're sitting at the table, baby Leroy quickly snatches a pocket watch out of W.C. Fields' vest pocket, and it lands in the molasses. To which the old gal says, "Oh, I certainly hope that didn't hurt your watch, Mr. So-and-so." To which W. Fields says, "Oh no, how could you possibly hurt a watch by dipping it in molasses?" And when I was a kid, I'd laugh. I'd roll on the floor laughing. That's sarcasm. No, you couldn't possibly hurt a watch by dipping it in molasses. What would ever give you that idea? That's sarcasm. Paul was an expert at sarcasm. Many of Paul's epistles reek with sarcasm. So is Christianity all about being nice? Is it all about that artificial smile? Bob says, "Frank, look on the console and break and turn up the bass on the mic you're using. Sounds like there's too much treble in it." All right, well, I will look at that. I will look at that mic I'm using. Justin was supposed to gain stage these mics. Possibly what I can do is I can get on another mic. I've got a third mic in here that I can use and see how that works, because I don't know that I want to start messing with I don't know if I want to start messing with the treble on something and get it let me shut this off. So I'm on a third mic here, Bob. How does this one work for you? I've got a third mic here. I muted the other mic I was using. And it looks pretty hot. It's spiking in the red, so maybe it is better. So, again, Jesus was kind. He met people in kindness, but he also had to deliver some hard lessons. He called people hypocrites. He called them vipers. Those are things that I don't think you'd want the Savior of the world to call you. So, I think I'll bookmark this article and save this article because it seems to be a pretty nice article that I may share another time. Now I want to talk about something that I think many of us can identify with. And I think everyone would know someone who is diabetic, either with type 1 or type 2. Type 1 diabetes, I'm guessing your body produces little or no insulin. That's type 1. Type 2 diabetes is your body is carrying too much weight. Your body is producing insulin, but it's not being distributed in an efficient manner would be the word. So Dr. Corinne says that the diabetic epidemic, what's hiding behind your blood sugar levels? Diabetes does not have to be a progressive disease and can be controlled or even reversed with just a few changes to your lifestyle habits. Even when you think you're exercising enough and eating the right foods, you may have been misinformed or maybe in the dark about products marketed for weight control. You don't just wake up one day and become a diabetic. In fact, there's virtually no symptoms that you may experience in the early or pre-diabetes stage. But then one day your annual blood tests come back and your doctor tells you that your glucose level was too high and your hemoglobin A1C was over 6.4%. What does this mean? Where does that come from? Why wasn't I warned? Now what? All these questions may be going through your head at the time, but what you're about to find out is that there's hidden factors behind medications, diets, and foods we eat, and even the hormones that may be contributing to the rise of the diabetic epidemic. Did you know that statins are known to raise glucose levels? Statins are a medication used to lower cholesterol. In fact, on average, statins can increase fasting plasma glucose in a non-diabetic statin user by 7 milligram DL, and in diabetics, statins increase glucose levels by 39 milligrams DL-1. Statins raise your risk of diabetes by increasing your insulin levels and blood sugars by blocking the liver's ability to convert starches you eat into cholesterol. Instead, the starches are returned to your bloodstream, which raises your sugars in your blood. Statins can more than double your risk of developing diabetes. Studies show individuals who use statin drugs longer than 2 years are more than 3 times as likely to get the disease. Unfortunately, as of 2014, the American Diabetes Association calls for patients with diabetes to put on a statin to lower the risk of heart disease. Your doctor may take into account other risk factors to determine which statin would be best for you based on blood pressure, cholesterol, age, etc. So if you were not diabetic before going on statin, how do you know if your diet is to blame or the medication could have been a contributing factor to your elevated glucose levels? There are many ways to reduce risk factors for heart disease, diabetes, and even lowering cholesterol naturally by changing a few things in your diet and exercise. Do you know what you're drinking? Do you know what you're eating? A simple way to cut out unneeded calories and sugar from the diet is to elevate your beverage sources. Many research studies have shown that sugary drinks from soda, fruit juice, sweetened tea, and especially coffee drinks can increase your risk of developing not just diabetes, but cause weight gain, inflammation, tooth decay, and even cancer. Research shows that adults who routinely consume at least 1 can of soda or other sugar-sweetened beverages a day are 46% more likely to develop an elevated blood sugar levels than people who rarely or never drink cola. And it's not just soda that can be the culprit. Fruit juice can be just as bad. For example, the average 12-ounce soda contains roughly 35 to 45 grams of sugar. The same amount of orange juice comes in at 30 grams. A study done by researchers from Sorbonne Paris Site University showed that consumption of sugary drinks, including 100% fruit juice, was significantly associated with the risk of overall cancer. Studies have shown hyperglycemic effects of common food additives, MSG, and aspartame not only increase the risk of diabetes, but food additives and artificial sweeteners have been linked to obesity, Alzheimer's, heart disease, autoimmune disease, and even cancer. Animal studies have also shown that dietary MSG induces markers of insulin resistance. When reading labels, try to avoid processed foods with these following ingredients: glutamic acid, gelatin, monosodium glutamate, calcium calcinate, textured protein, sodium caseinate, bouillon and broth, natural flavoring, soy protein isolate, hydrolyzed protein. These additives, just to name a few, you may be more sensitive to additives than you think if you get headaches, muscle aches, swelling, or any type of allergy of symptoms after eating certain foods. You may want to read other ingredients section of the nutrition label to see if there are any additives in the product. Different carbohydrates affect your blood in different ways. The way food makes your blood sugar rise is dependent on the glycemic index. The glycemic index is based on a scale of 0 to 100. The lower the number, the slower the food makes your blood sugar rise. However, the glycemic index does not take into account carbohydrates contained in the food. A low glycemic load diet is not as restrictive as you think. Researchers' list of low glycemic load food is available on the web. However, here are some vegetables and fruits to consider with the lowest carbohydrate content. Are you ready? These, I only see one thing on this list I do not eat. I'm not saying I don't eat it. I'm not saying I wouldn't eat it. I'm just saying I don't eat it. And that would be kale. But starting with number 1, asparagus, avocado, broccoli, carrots, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, celery, cucumber, kale, lettuce, mushrooms, onions, peppers of any kind, tomato, cantaloupe, strawberries, and watermelon. Bang! I passed the test. I eat 99.9% of those things. In fact, I love them all. I love every single one of them. Probably Brussels sprouts would be probably the one that would be the most, it kind of depends on the day. But let me repeat those again. Asparagus, avocado, broccoli, carrots, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, celery, cucumber, kale, lettuce, mushrooms, onions, peppers, tomato, cantaloupe, strawberries, and watermelon. Are you testing enough? The best way to know your sugar level is to monitor it. And then supplements for diabetes. Deficiencies can be corrected with proper supplements. Diabetics should be on common vitamins such as C, fish oil, magnesium, vitamin E. Other nutrients would be niacin, vanadium, chromium, picolinate, and whatever else indicated by your comprehensive testing, which, in fact, I take most of these vitamins. One of the things we're the most deficient on when it comes to vitamins, and it happens to our depression level hinges on it, is vitamin D. Most people are severely deficient on vitamin D. But eat right, get exercise, get fresh air, get fresh sunlight, take a vitamin supplement. It's the key to living. It's not rocket science, people. And particularly if you eat a flesh meat diet. And that's even if you avoid the unclean animals such as Porky the pig. That's swine for those in Rio Linda. But you need, if you eat flesh meat, you need a lot of these things to balance off the potential harm and the potential effect that you may even get from clean flesh meats. So this is another good article. I think I'll save that one too. I've got so many articles saved. Justin's going nuts because he looked at my bookmark list and there was like 50,000 bookmarks. But Justin, buddy, maybe one day I'll clean a few of them out. Here's a good story, I think. We have 8 minutes till the top of the hour. Here's a good story, in my opinion. Quote, intent to cause chaos. An armed off-duty firefighter stops a heavily armed suspect wearing body armor at a Walmart store in Missouri. A 20-year-old suspect was carrying loaded Let me actually open the story because it's only given me a headline. This is from Fox News. An armed man reportedly wearing body armor and pushing a shopping cart at Walmart store in Missouri. I mean, that's... what would this guy be up to? A armed man reportedly wearing body armor and pushing a shopping cart at Walmart store in Missouri on Thursday led a store manager to pull a fire alarm and send customers fleeing. But an armed off-duty firefighter was able to detain the man until police officers arrived. Springfield. So this is from Springfield, Missouri. The 20-year-old suspect was carrying loaded tactical weapons, according to reports. He was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. However, police didn't immediately say what the charges were he was arrested on. I mean, in some states, you have open carry. His intent, obviously, was to cause chaos, and he did here, said Springfield Police Lieutenant Mike Lucas. It wasn't immediately clear if the man was detained. If the man who was detained told cops why he was at the store. However, the incident comes 5 days after a mass shooting at Walmart store in El Paso. That shooting resulted in 22 deaths. His intent, obviously, was to cause chaos, and it likely would have been chaos even if he didn't do any shooting. People may have trampled over themselves just to get out of there even if he didn't do anything. I guess it's a little bit like, yelling fire in a crowded movie theater even if there's no fire. In a Facebook post, Springfield Police wrote that officers were dispatched to Walmart around 4:10 p.m. Thursday on reports of an armed white male. El Paso and Dayton could define August. The suspect was wearing body armor and military-style clothing. He walked inside a Walmart carrying a tactical rifle and another gun. The newspaper reports that he had more than 100 rounds of ammo. I guess, he could be... I suppose he could just be playing with the cops. Maybe intended on doing nothing. I mean, we're going to get so sensitive in this world that we're going to start trying to... I think John Travolta was in a movie one time. I don't remember the title. Let me see if I can find that. But John Travolta was in a movie about thought crime. Says Blowout. Not sure if this is the movie. Okay, that's not the movie. But there was a movie John Travolta was in. And it was... I don't remember who the other actor was. But it was a movie about catching people based on their thoughts, that they don't act out. So, for example, if I had a thought in my mind that I wanted to punch somebody in the nose, and somehow my thoughts could be revealed, the idea that someone would come and file a charge or arrest me simply for thinking a thought. We're going to get to the point in this country where we are arresting people based on thoughts and not actions. And that's what we're headed for. And I kind of think that maybe this guy was just trying to press the envelope and not really... I'll see if I can find that. I'll mention that. I'll mention the movie to you later if I find it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking for it now, but that does kind of bug me when I can't think of something that I'm trying to share. So if I do find it, I'll share it with you later. Bob Carr says, "Good show, Frank, on health. Thank you, Bob." Didn't say anything about the sound, but always like to know when people appreciate the shows that I do. But back to the story. I just have a feeling here that this guy wasn't intending on shooting anyone. I just have the feeling that he was trying to press the envelope and see what would happen if he walked into a Walmart with military-style gear and military-looking weapons and see what happens if he did nothing. Because why else would somebody be walking around the store with a shopping cart? I mean, if you came into a Walmart, wouldn't you go into immediate action? You certainly wouldn't be walking around with a shopping cart. So I have a feeling this is a gag. I have a feeling this is a hoax. But if it turns out that this guy had some nefarious intent, we salute an armed off-duty firefighter. Let me see. I've got a couple more stories. I might share one or two with you after the... Here's a short one I can just... let me just go to our SRN news break, and I will come back and I will see. Let's see. Yes, maybe it's this. Oh yeah, okay. Maybe it wasn't Tom Cruise. Maybe it wasn't John Travolta. Maybe it was Tom Cruise. Yes, you're right, Bob. Thanks for that. Tom Cruise. It was a future where police units are able to arrest murderers before they commit their crimes. An officer from that unit is himself accused of a future murder. Yes, okay, that comes back to memory. A lot of times, Tom Cruise and John Travolta are in movies that kind of blend into your brain. But yeah, Bob, you're right. Thank you for mentioning that. Or no, that was actually Brian. Pardon me. It was Brian, not Bob. Thank you, Brian, for mentioning that. Appreciate that you're listening. Listening to the overbose. The verse. All right, so we're going to get to our SRN news break. And I still think it's hotter than Hades, but I'm going to go with it. See what happens. Get my cart up here, and I will let you know.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes. With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. President Trump says there's increasing momentum for passing a law requiring gun background checks.
In the wake of the recent mass shootings in Texas and Ohio, the president is expressing optimism about legislative action.
I think we can have some really meaningful background checks.
He says he wants to stop the gun violence.
We don't want people that are mentally ill, people that are sick. We don't want them having guns.
The president says he has lobbied Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and has been speaking with other congressional leaders as well as with the NRA. Greg Clugston, the White House.
Police in El Paso, Texas say the Walmart shooting suspect told them he targeted Mexicans.
Detective Adrian Garcia said in an arrest warrant affidavit, Patrick Crucius agreed to waive his Miranda rights. It says Crucius emerged with his hands up from a vehicle that was stopped shortly after the shooting. His first words to officers were, "I'm the shooter." Crucius told them he had driven for nearly 10 hours to get to El Paso, and he was targeting Mexicans in the attack. 8 of the 22 people killed at the Walmart were Mexican nationals. Besides capital murder, federal prosecutors have said they are also considering hate crime charges against Crucius. I'm Ed Donahue.
President Trump said Friday he received a beautiful 3-page letter from Kim Jong-un and predicted that the two leaders would have more talks to try to resolve the standoff over North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Mr. Trump says he's not bothered by the flurry of missiles that Kim has launched in recent days.
It was a great letter. He talked about what he's doing. He's not happy with the testing. It's a very small testing that we did, but he wasn't happy with the testing. He put that in the letter. But he also sees a great future for North Korea.
The two leaders have met 3 times in Singapore, Hanoi, and the Korean demilitarized zone late last month, but no new talks have been scheduled. On Wall Street, they're down by 90 points. This is SRN News. U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, is enlisting other nations in his effort to protect people of faith.
We would like to see 100 religious freedom roundtables established around the world in various cities and countries that advocate for religious freedom in their area.
Brownback tells SRN News.
We've got about 20 of those going now. We think that can really help drive the topic on a domestic, localized basis.
He says the goal is to end persecution of religious people in all nations. The Federal Office for Civil Rights launched an investigation into Connecticut's policy that allows transgender high school athletes to compete as the gender with which they identify. The investigation follows a complaint in June by families of 3 girls who say they were discriminated against by having to compete in track events against 2 boys who were living as girls. The complaint was submitted on the girls' behalf by Lawyers for Alliance Defending Freedom. SRN News. Egyptian security forces say they've killed 17 militants who were linked to a recent car bomb explosion in Cairo in which at least 20 people died.
The Egyptian authorities say the suspected militants were killed during 3 raids in Cairo and a province south of the capital. The Interior Ministry also say they've identified the bomber behind Sunday night's attack when a car laden with explosives rammed vehicles outside the National Cancer Institute. The authorities claim the 24-year-old man was a member of what they describe as the Hassan terrorist cluster cell. Egypt accuses Hassan of being a wing of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood.
The BBC's Martin Patience. 6 of 7 Mississippi chicken processing plants raided Wednesday were, quote, willfully and unlawfully employing people who lacked authorization to work in the United States. More details at srnnews.com. I'm Keith Peters in Washington.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes. Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Mark 10:27. Every weekday on the Power of God, KPOG 102.9 FM, and live on webcast1live.com. Join us for a view from the pew. Should you be offended, provoked, triggered, intimidated, shocked, confused, or inspired to think independently, call our studio lines at 515-442-KPOG and join the conversation. After all, it's your voice we want to hear. The View from the Pew on KPOG and webcast1live.com. Weekdays from 4 to 6 on the Power of God. Now, here's today's host, Frank the Verse Thomas.
Well, welcome back. This is your host, Frank the Verse Thomas, and we're here with A View from the Pew. If you would like to contact the show, I would certainly appreciate it. I'd like to know that you're listening. So, I'd like to have your feedback, and I don't even care if it's bad. You can tell me I'm out to lunch. You can tell me you don't agree. That's what freedom is about. I get on this soapbox here at KPOG, and I talk about our freedom, and I talk about our freedoms are being threatened. And our freedoms are going to remain free until this gospel gets spread, and then the angels will let go of the four winds at the four corners of the earth, and then it's game on. But until then, I love my freedom. I love my freedom of expression. And I'm not going to support anyone politically who does not support freedom of speech. And so that's how you know where Frank the Verse stands here, is he's all about freedom of speech. And we have to give that same... we have to grant that same, how shall I say it, that same privilege to everyone. Even white supremacists, even neo-Nazis, if we start shutting down speech, and I don't say that because I support white nationalism or racism, but if you stop people from being able to speak and we leave it to the judgment of others, it's always going to lead to tyranny and persecution. So as offensive as speech is, we have to allow it. And I suggest the more they speak, the more they hang themselves. You know, I've told you the story about the neighborhood dog, or not the neighborhood dog, but the dog that my aunt and uncle owned, Rufus, that I named. And when Rufus was running free and wild, he started killing neighborhood chickens. And he didn't eat them. He just killed them. So they had to tie old Rufus up, and Rufus kept jumping a neighbor's fence. The neighbor on the neighbor with the chickens was on the south side. The fence that the dog kept jumping was on the north side of the yard. And he kept jumping this fence, and they kept moving the dog pen and the chain further and further back from the fence until one day Rufus had just enough rope to jump and clear the fence, but not enough rope to get his feet on the ground. And Rufus was found hanging on the fence. That's how free speech works. Let people talk. Their own words will convict them. Their own words will hang them. But if we shut up everybody's words and we don't want to, then all this stuff goes underground and all this hatred goes underground. We would at least like to see what's being said and what's being thought. But I would share with you, and thanks to Brian for finding this for me, as I was talking about the first hour, the movie is Minority Report with Tom Cruise. Colin Farrell was in the movie. Not too many other people that I particularly, Kate Capshaw. Not too many other people that I necessarily recognize. Neil McDonough is kind of a recognizable face if you know who that is. But anyway, it's based on a story by a famed science fiction writer, Philip K. Dick. Minority Report is an action detective thriller set in Washington, D.C. in 2054, where police utilize a psychic technology to arrest and convict murderers before they can commit their crime. Tom Cruise plays the head of this pre-crime unit as he himself is accused of a future murder of a man he's never met. That's what we're going to get to in this country if calmer and cooler heads don't prevail. Just a couple of stories I want to quickly get through because I think they're interesting stories. Israel's gun culture and how they prevent mass shootings, can we learn anything from them? While Israel does not offer its citizens any right to bear arms within its framework of basic laws, guns are commonplace and part of the culture of Israel. With mandatory conscription, most Israelis have handled automatic weapons while serving in the military. Soldiers, including those who are off-duty, are often seen across the country carrying machine guns while thousands of Israelis carry handguns. But there's nobody shooting each other. Many Israelis have weapons. They're not available to everyone and anyone. You receive a gun license, you must meet several criteria. First, an individual must live and work in a geographic area deemed to pose high terror risks, such as citizens living on the West Bank. Next, a family doctor who's been treating an individual for many years must complete a detailed health evaluation certifying that the applicant is both physically incapable and mentally stable enough to carry a weapon. An applicant also needs to complete a shooting course with a certified instructor and demonstrate a sufficient mastery. It's not too difficult of handling and shooting a weapon before a license is granted. A detailed security check is performed on applicants by Israeli authorities. Once granted, a license then permits an individual to own and carry a single handgun and trying to open the story here and don't want to go too far in it, but you can own a handgun, and let me see what else it said. I just hate it when they cut something off like that and they don't at least finish a sentence. So anyway, I'm guessing that you can own guns, you can carry handguns. Israel is, okay, here it is. And it's way down in the story. Once granted, a license then permits an individual to own and carry a single handgun, and the specific weapon purchased by the gun owner is embedded in the license. So only the licensee may use that specified pistol. If the individual wishes to change handguns, the license must be amended. Further, the license permits a gun owner to store a maximum of 50 bullets at any given time. A license owner may carry a weapon exposed, open carry, or concealed without limitation. The license must be renewed every 2 years and requires periodic shooting instruction and proof of proficiency. Okay, these are, these would be reasonable things, but Israel kind of is on the forefront of security. You don't see airplanes blowing up in the Israeli skies. You don't see terrorists on Israeli-bound airplanes to the United States of America or wherever they send airplanes, because they have a pretty good track record of this stuff. So we could learn some things from the Israelis here. Yeah, thank you. Sound's working great today. I got a message from on text that said the sound is working great today. So hopefully we've addressed the issue today. We will see what happens on Monday. Quickly, I would just share with you the movie actor Danny Trejo rescues a trapped baby, the power of joy in hard times. Actor Danny Day, in a week filled with bad news, here's some good news. Actor Danny Trejo helped rescue a baby trapped in an overturned car in Los Angeles last Wednesday. Video shows him at the scene where two cars crashed. He says he crawled into the vehicle from one side but couldn't unbuckle the child's car seat from that angle. Another bystander, a young woman, was able to undo the buckle. Together they pulled the baby safely from the wreckage. The same day, a man who became wedged between rocks in Cambodian jungle was rescued after being trapped for nearly 4 days. He slipped Sunday while trying to retrieve his flashlight, which had fallen into a small rocky hollow. His family began searching for him when he hadn't returned after 3 days. After his brother found him, about 200 rescue workers spent 10 hours chipping away the rock that had him pinned. He was freed and taken to a local hospital. Why do these stories make the news? People help people all the time. If an unnamed woman in L.A. had rescued the baby without the actor's help, I doubt her story would make headlines. If the man in Cambodia had been lost in the jungle rather than wedged between rocks, his rescue probably would not have been reported globally. I also wonder if these stories would have received so much attention during a week not dominated by mass shootings. Anxiety continues to escalate in America, though, especially among young people. According to a recent data, nearly half of college students surveyed felt overwhelming anxiety over the previous year. Multiple false reports and hoaxes about active shooters have spread around the country, sparking widespread fear. Crowds panicked in Times Square in New York after a motorcycle backfired, igniting fears of another shooting. Southern Baptist ethicist Russell Moore was asked by Newsweek to explain the distress of our days. He replied, "I think fear is a universal human condition, so in that sense I don't think it's new. I think right now there's perhaps a different kind of fear as it relates to the fear of disconnection. I think the fear of loneliness we see around us is amping up the sense of being under siege. And I think it's one of the reasons why we see this drive towards herd mentalities on social media. The darker the room is, the more obvious will be the light. When Paul and Silas sang hymns to God in a jail cell and other prisoners were listening to them, and the jailer himself later come to faith in Acts 16, when the apostles were beaten and ordered to stop preaching, they were overjoyed because they had been given the honor of being dishonored on the account of his name. Acts 5. Joy transcends circumstances. While happiness is a product of happenings, joy is the fruit of the Spirit. I need some more of that fruit because I'm telling you, sometimes it's not the easiest to be joyful. Galatians 5. Jesus promised his followers that after his resurrection, I will see you again and your hearts will rejoice and no one will take your joy from you. The closer we are to Jesus, the more we will manifest his joy. That's what we learn in school, Sabbath school. True joy is Jesus first, acronym. Others second. Yourself third. So if we put ourselves in that order, we will find joy in life because we will have our priorities set straight. The key to focus on Christ, to focus more on Christ than on our circumstances. As I've often said to family and others, Satan is very good at placing things right in front of your face, right in front of your nose that you can't see around, you can't see under, you can't see above. It's just in your face wherever you go, and you have to look forward to a longer range goal. Don't get hung up on what Satan has got in front of your face at the moment. So don't focus on circumstances, focus on Christ. It is to live vertically in a horizontal culture, bring every challenge to Jesus and finding in him the courage and hope that he alone provides. Oswald Chambers says God does not give us overcoming life, he gives us life as we overcome. You can have joy in a cell. What do you wish that was different about your life? If Paul could find joy in a jail cell, you can find joy where you're at this morning. Paul knew what he was headed for. Paul knew he was headed for a beheading. Paul knew that he was not long for this earth. But he was in a prison cell for 5 years, and he knew that he was going to die. But he still had joy. When we're submitted to the Holy Spirit, no matter our circumstance, we will always rejoice in the Lord. Pursue heavenly joy today, that you might demonstrate the surpassing kindness of your Heavenly Father to a world that is desperately seeking what only can be found in a restored relationship with Him. Will those of you who see you today see the joy of Jesus in you? I have one quick story here. Christian missions change directions, the task of reconverting the West. You know how the West seems to be apostatizing? In his book, The Reason for God, Tim Keller argues that Christianity is the only true global religion. Indeed, within a few generations of Christ, Christian faith has spread across much of the known world, from India to North Africa, to the furthest reaches of the Roman Empire, into the barbarian lands of Northern Europe. Yet up until 100 years ago or so, for all kinds of historical and sociological reasons, Christianity has become predominantly a Western religion. The missionary efforts over the last 100 years begin to change that, and now Pew Research predicts that Africa will be the most Christian continent within about 40 years. Well, amen! What we're dropping, leaving behind, ignoring, taking for granted here in the United States and other Western civilizations, there will be others who pick up the mantle. The story behind this geographical relocation is overwhelmingly a story of missions. For centuries, the West sent evangelists to Africa, Asia, South America to preach the gospel, plant churches, and create Christian communities where none existed. The heroes of the faith in the ancient church were theologians and bishops, and those during the Reformation, were reformers. Most of them's names we recognize. Most of the names we recognize since the Reformation are missionaries. This move of the gospel from the west to the south and the east could be one of the largest scale fulfillments of the Great Commission since Jesus first gave it. It's the only thing that's going to bring about the end of time. The gospel must go into every nation, kindred, and tongue. Then shall the end come, not before the end. Then shall the end come. God can't come before this message is given to the world. But we have a situation where the millennials have a oxymoron. It's called cognitive dissonance. They hold two opposite views 180 degrees apart, but simultaneously think both are true. While many millennials think a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as a Savior is an important issue to them, but proselytizing others is not. So there goes our mission fields, and there goes our evangelists' efforts. Friend, I'm going to tell you right here, right now, you're not going to want to face your Savior and have your Savior said, I had to have the rocks cry out because you wouldn't open your pie hole. Now, Frank, you might think that's a little, it's a little blunt. It may be a little coarse or a little blunt. Well, I'm not in this world to tickle ears. I'm not in this planet to tickle your ears and feed you candy-coated poison. I'm telling you, open your pie hole for something other than shoving pie in it. Open your mouth and talk about the love of Jesus Christ in this world, and that He's here to save you from your sins, not in your sins. How many preachers want to preach that message? Well, it's not a friendly message. It's not politically correct message. Everyone wants to hear, oh, you're okay in your sin. God's just going to save you anyway. He came to save you from your sins. Emmanuel with us. As the angel told the world and told Mary. This move of the gospel from the west to the south and the east could be one of the largest fulfillments of the great gospel since Jesus first gave it. Yet a fascinating piece in The Economist explains the direction of the flow of the Christian missions has been now largely reversed. As it did, the geographic center of faith has also shifted. A century ago, as Pew reports, only over 90% of the world's Christians lived in Europe and Americas, and less than 6% lived in Africa and Asia. Today, over a third of all Christians hail from those continents. This is the feeding ground, seemingly now, for Christianity, because United States of America and a lot of Europe, a good share of Europe, is falling into apostasy. Chris Barr, a pastor here in the Des Moines area, who had a premature exit from the Des Moines area. In other words, he was run out of town by some. Chris Barr was a good Brit. And Chris Barr said that Europe is Britain quickly becoming a godless nation. So while this article says that the UK, the United States, and Europe in general, let me see if I can find that stat again, 90% of the world's Christians lived in Europe and the Americas. So that would be Europe and North and South America, and less than 6% of Christians lived in Africa and Asia. Now today, over a third of Christians hail from those two continents, Asia and Africa. And obviously there's 7 continents, including the Antarctic, I guess, which I don't think there's too many Christians up in the Arctic. But many of our continents are cooling off religiously, while other continents are heating up. In fact, you know how we reported here on the show how they were having this great consternation within the Methodist Church. How it was those pesky Christians from places like Africa and maybe Asia who were wanting to stand on the Word of God up against the politically correct LGBTQ movement and the ordaining of gay and lesbian pastors and the ordaining of gay and lesbian same-sex relationships. America's thrown in the towel. Go into a local Methodist church in America and likely they've tossed in the towel on these issues. But it's the Christians from overseas, it's the Christians in Africa, it's the Christians in Asia that are saying, hey, we're standing up against debauchery. We're standing up against licentiousness. We're standing up against evil, corruption. The West is vastly becoming and quickly becoming a godless nations and godless continents. As this Christian population shift is taking place, something else interesting has also happened. Poor developing countries, once benefited from Western missionaries coming into their culture, have started sending missionaries of their own back to us. While the U.S. still leads the world in sending missionaries, something that has been true for a long time, our market share is dropping. The largest growth seen in global missions output is in non-Western countries, and it's happening that fast. Between 2010 and 2015, the number of African missionaries jumped 32% over to over 27,000. Korean missionaries jumped 50% to 30,000 in the same period, and the countries receiving the lion's shares of these missionaries is Brazil, Russia, and wait for it, the United States of America. As one of those churches that's been largely slaped, as one whose church has been largely slaped by the, you can get that word out one of these days, shaped by the missionary efforts of African Christians, I thank God for this new trend. At the same time, anyone trying to convert Westerners has their work cut out for them. You think? As the Economist piece observed, saving the rich is difficult, though Jesus said it wasn't impossible. Among the compelling stories of Christian history we may read about one day will be whether missionaries from global south coaxed Western camels through the eye of a needle. To which I say to my friend Christian, no. Wealth, Christian, is not intrinsically evil. No more than a gun is intrinsically evil. No more than the fork that you feed yourself with is intrinsically evil. It is the person who picks up the money, the person who picks up the gun, the person who picks up the fork, the person at the end of the self-developing camera, the person at the end of the video camera. You know, as I said, when video cameras first came out, it didn't take too long that you realized that you could take a picture of your children and your grandchildren and then take a picture of something else that no one should actually probably see. Painting a little theater of the mind there for you. Those bringing the good news back to our shores, and even more in Europe's shores, often remark how jaded and how difficult it can be to convert Westerners, having once had the faith, but having at least lost it partially. We're like the bird-infested path or the thorny ground in which is in Jesus' parable. I'm going to repeat this to you one more time, friends. Better to have never known than to have known and walked away. God is going to hold the sheer infidel in better stead that at least obeyed the light and the knowledge given him than the Christian who was given so much and walked away from the faith. You remember this week I shared a story with you about a Christian minister who has renounced his faith. Even so, to whatever scale the effort to reconverse the West succeeds or not, it ought to leave us in awe of God's wisdom. Within just the span of a few centuries, the church went global, and it was precisely at the time the West began to lose its faith. Both the work of missionaries who plant seeds abroad and return of that fruit to their own shores are testaments to providence. We ought to be reminded them that God is no respecter of persons, nations, or continents. He's no respecter of lineage, no respecter of wealth. That's why the Pharisees thought they were a shoe-in. They were in need of nothing. God told them they're blind as bats. You better sell everything you have and purchase some eye salve because I'm standing right before you, in front of you. I'm the Messiah, and you're getting ready to kill me. They were in need of nothing. They thought their wealth, their lineage, made them a sure bet to be in the kingdom. I only wish those early global missionaries could see all this unfold. Of course, those who have joined the great cloud of witnesses have had a perspective on the whole story that's better than our own. They obeyed Jesus' command to make disciples of all nations. I wonder if they had any idea those nations would one day return the favor. So I want to share with you here for about, about 5 minutes. I've talked to you a little bit in the past about the Millerite movement. And I've shared with you some things in Ellen White's writings that talk about how if the Millerite movement had remained hot after the Great Disappointment, God would have came soon. I've always gave a disclaimer. I never knew what the word soon meant because it's been 175 years or so since the Great Disappointment in 1844. What did soon mean? 175 years is a pittance. 175 years in God's scheme of time is nothing. When somebody's Alpha and Omega, no beginning and no end, what's 175 years to God? 175 years to me is a long time because I'm never even going to live to be 175. But in doing some reading from Ellen White's early writings 2 Sabbaths ago, or the Sabbath before last, I found out what soon meant. As I was reading in her book, Early Writings, on page 258, see if I can find it here real quickly, and I will share it with you. Three Angels' Message. The problem with William Miller is he never totally understood the third of the Three Angels' Message. If William Miller had seen the light of the third angel's message, many things that looked dark and mysterious to him would have been explained, but his brethren professed so deep a love and interest for him that they thought they could not tear away from them. His heart would incline towards the truth, and he looked at his brethren. They opposed it. Could he tear away from those who had stood by side with him in rejoicing the coming of Jesus? He thought they would surely not lead him astray. So he was being pulled in every direction. William Miller fell, I don't know that I would say he totally apostatized, but he fell into a cold, backslidden state after the Great Disappointment in 1844. And Mrs. White saw men leading him, watching him, fearing lest he should receive that third angel's message. But Miller never totally understood it. So the kindest thing God could do was allow William Miller to fall under the power of Satan. So Miller fell into the grasps of the grave in 1849, 5 years after the Great Disappointment. So I want to read for you this statement. God suffered Miller to fall under the power of Satan, the dominion of death, and hid him in the grave from those who were constantly drawing him from truth. He had deist friends. He had disavowed being a Freemason in 1831, so I'm sure he had a lot of Freemason friends. And Freemasonry is exactly tied into Catholicism and the papacy. It's a sub-organization of the Jesuits, Knights of the Templar. A lot of these secret societies are subgroups of the papacy and stand under the Jesuit general, the Black Pope. So he had a lot of influences trying to pull him this direction, pull him that direction. The kindest thing God could do was allow Miller to fall into the grasp of the grave, the tomb, where he awaits resurrection. But this is what soon meant. Moses erred as he was soon to enter the promised land. I also saw that William Miller erred as he was soon to enter the heavenly promised land. In suffering his influence to go against the truth, others led him to this, others must account for it, but angels watch the precious dust of this servant of God as he will come forth at the sound of the last trumpet to resurrection to eternal life. So Miller was forgiven. Are you forgiven? Miller was forgiven. But I want you to stop and think about this, because this is eye-opening, because it opened my eyes greatly. Mrs. White also said in other places in the Bible, or I mean not in the Bible, but in her writings, that in the Bible when the Jews were ready to enter the promised land, God wanted to take them directly there. He didn't want to dawdle in 40 years. I've heard secular people talk that it might have been an 11-day walk, depending on the route. But say you have a lot of people, and you have a lot of young, and a lot of old, a lot of animals, and you have to set up camp, tear down camp, set up camp, tear down camp. That may have taken 30 days. And that would probably get you there twice, but let's say 30 days. That 30 days took 40 years. And Mrs. White says that no longer does God want to delay his coming now than he wanted to delay to take the children right to the promised land. And he wanted to take them directly there. And God, soon after 1844, wanted to take his people home. But I never knew what soon was and how long soon was. But in reading early writings, I've discovered what soon was. It would have been in William Miller's natural life. I would suggest to you William Miller died a premature death in 1849 at 67 years old. I suggest it was the stress and the depression and the anxiety and the mysterious darkness that surrounded him that took his life prematurely. I would suggest to you that given 20 to 25, maybe even 30 more years, I'm going to suggest to you Christ would have returned within 20 to 30 years of the great disappointment. 20 years would put it at 1864. 30 years would put it at 1874. So within 30 years of the great disappointment, God would have returned. Do you realize what that means? That means the verse wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Now I can hear you all out there applauding, but you wouldn't be here either. And that's fine with me if I had never been here, because I wouldn't have known it. But realize the things we never would have seen. We never would have seen World War I and World War II. We never would have seen the Holocaust. We never would have seen Pearl Harbor. We never would have seen the Twin Towers dropped in 2001. I was driving to the studio the other day, and I was coming 235 west, and I looked at everything I saw, all the bridges and all the infrastructure and all the cars on the freeway and the interstate system, and I said, none of this would exist. 1874 would have been roughly 9 years after the Civil War. 9 years after the Civil War ended in 1865. 1874 would have been 34 years after what we call the Industrial Revolution. In 1830, the ballpoint pen, the telephone, the telegraph, and the locomotive. God would have come pre-1900. My great-grandmother was born in 1880. Wouldn't have been here. My grandma was born in 1900. Wouldn't have been here. My dad in 1935. Wouldn't have been here. I would have been born in 1957. Wouldn't have been here. My mom's parents born in 1912 and 1916. Wouldn't have been here. My mom born in 1938. Wouldn't have been here. You see what I'm talking about, friend? We could have been home. Not us, literally, we never would have been born. We wouldn't have known any better. But God could have came pre-1900. That boggles the mind to think that everything I've done on this earth, in one way or another, has been a waste of time. The pursuit of love, the pursuit of family, the pursuit of a lot of things, there are a lot of times I put before the pursuit of God. I went to boarding academy. If I would have been sitting in boarding academy in the 70s and someone would have told me, hey, you have a choice between pursuing a family and pursuing children and pursuing this, or really focus on the second coming of Christ, I think I would have chose the second coming of Christ. But I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that being preached in the boarding academy. I didn't hear it being preached in my church. I've found all this out since I've been alive in my own personal study. I don't know that I've ever heard it from a Seventh-day Adventist pulpit. So I'll say the call to you today is, if God could have came in 1900, and he wanted to come pre-1900, he is just as anxious and willing to come right now. Are you? You talk about the second coming to some people and they get upset and angry because they don't really want him to come. They enjoy sin too much. When you talk about the second coming to people and they get viscerally angry, they get viscerally upset. They don't want to hear it. Hear no evil, know no evil, see no evil. They don't want their lives disrupted. Friends, that's the Laodicean, lazy, apathetic church, and God is getting ready to spew that people out his mouth. All right, so let's get to the lesson study for today. I was going to share some reading with you, but I'll forgo that today because we've got some Let me do read this though. Oh, if I could type, it would help. This is from Luke 11:37-44. When Jesus finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him, and he went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed Jesus did not wash before the meal. And the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisee, clean the outside of the cup and the dish. You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness, you foolish people. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Woe to the Pharisee, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Woe to you, Pharisee, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you, Pharisee, because you're like an unmarked grave which people will walk over without knowing it." In urging the value of practical godliness, the prophet was only preparing the counsel given Israel centuries before. From age to age, these counsels was repeated by the servants of Jehovah to those who were in danger of falling into the habits of formalism and forgetting to show mercy. This is from Prophets and Kings, Ellen White, pages 326 to 327. I have been instructed, according to Ellen White, to refer to our people as the 58th chapter of Isaiah. Read this chapter carefully and understand the kind of ministry that will bring life into the church. The work of the gospel is to be carried by the means of our liberality as well as our labors. And that's not That's not liberal in our social lives. That's liberal in our giving, as well as our labors. When you meet suffering souls who need help, give it to them. When you find those who are hungry, feed them. In doing this, this will be the working in the lines of Christ's ministry. The Master's holy work was benevolent work. Let our people everywhere be encouraged to have part in it. That's from Ellen G. White's Welfare Ministry, page 29. Quickly, I'll just share a little bit with you. I've shared it a few times this week. But Isaiah 58 says, cry aloud, Isaiah. Spare not, Isaiah. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet, Isaiah, and show my people, Isaiah, their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me daily. They delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinance of justice. They take delight in approaching God. Wherefore have we fasted, they say? Thou seest not. Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thus take no knowledge? Behold, in the days of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high. Is this such a fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? It is not the fast I have chosen, to loose the bands of the wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest them naked, cover them. Hide not thyself from thy own flesh, like was the case of the story of the Good Samaritan, how his own kind walked by and wouldn't so much as take their eyes off the path to give him an ounce of help. It took the lowly Samaritan that was seen as lower than a dog to stop and help. Then shalt thou call out, if you will cry and call out to me, I will say, here I am. If thou wilt take away from the midst of thee the yoke, and putting forth the finger and speaking vanity, and if you draw out thy soul to the hungry, satisfy the afflicted, then thy light rise in obscurity, and the darkness be as noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, like a spring of waters, whose waters cease to fail. And if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy own pleasure on my holy day, and call my Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thy own ways, nor finding thy own pleasure, nor speaking thy own words, then thou shalt find delight in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Summary, and then I'll hit a few questions here. While the prophets were concerned about evil in the land, they were particularly focused on the evil committed by the people who claimed and worshiped God as their own. His own people, his own children. He cleans his own house first. Okay, hypocrites. When you're looking to clean your brother's house, try cleaning your own first. For the prophets and Jesus, worship is inconsistent with injustice, and such religion is hypocrisy. The real worship God is seeking, including working against oppression and caring for the poor and needy. Have you ever thought about doing justice and loving mercy as acts of worship? How How might this change your approach for caring for others? How might this change your approach to worship? Well, the whole quarterly is based on what you do to the least of my brethren, you've done it unto me. Well, Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you naked? When did we see you poor? When did we see you sick? God says, if you've done to the least of my brethren, you've done it also unto me. Same thing with if you've done evil to the least of my brethren, you've done it also unto me. That's not what quickly comes to mind when you talk about the least of my brethren. Because if you abuse, if you hurt, if you mistreat, if you torture, traumatize someone, you've done it unto God. Makes you think twice about what you've done in your life to people. I've not been a person in life who was a person who enjoyed picking wings off of flies. I've done my share of probably unkind things to people. I'm not on the worst list. I'm not on the best list. Maybe somewhere in between. But it makes you think. Makes you think about what you've done. How can we guard against neglecting the more important matters of the law? Matthew 23:3. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, your mint, your dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter. In our Christian lives, both individually and as church community, can you recognize some examples in your own experience where you may have strained out gnats, but you swallowed camels? Sure, we've all done that. We've all done things where we've thought we've kept the letter of the law, but we missed some glaring weakness in our own estimation. Why is hypocrisy considered such a sin? Mrs. White compares it to leprosy. It's because hypocrisy is like leaven in a dough. It's like yeast in a dough. It can change the whole mass of the dough slowly and imperceptibly until the whole mass is conformed to it. And that's how sin grows in our life. That little sin that it just don't seem that big, and then pretty soon you're a full-blown sinner, and it really doesn't seem that bad. You've deceived yourself. You've deceived yourself into believing you're still a good person when you're a vile, contemptible person. Isn't it better at least to try to look good? To look like we're doing good? No, it's not. God would rather have you hot or cold than lukewarm, because if you're lukewarm, you're going to spit you out. Do you understand a lukewarm Christian is doing more damage to the cause of God than an ice cold Christian? Because at least an ice cold Christian God can deal with. It's that poser, it's that hypocrisy, it's that veneer that you only look like a Christian, but there's nothing under the surface. How does God's vision and passion for the poor and needy as expressed through the prophets change your view of how you view the world? How might you read or hear your local news reports in a different way if you saw and heard it with the eyes and the ears of a prophet? Well, friends, we see these people and we think it's not going to happen to us. We see a mass murderer go in and shoot up a Walmart. That could be a Walmart in any town, USA. Can happen to any family. So pray that God will bring somebody in your path that you can have compassion for. You can have compassion for, you can witness to, and you can say, hey, I've dealt with similar things like that. I've had tragedy in my life. Console, witness to those who are hurting and in need. So this is Frank the Verse Thomas. This has been Viewed from the Pew, and we will see you again on Monday. If I can find my cart.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grind. Times.